There. My name is Melissa Laco. I'm a board certified behavior analyst, and I work at Julie Billiart School in Akron. So my role this school year has been to consult with teachers as well as focusing on individual students who struggle with behavioral challenges in school. So I would give some general classroom strategies or even go so far as to come up with a student-specific behavior plan. Also a former special education teacher. And so now with the school being closed because of the global pandemic, I have been helping out with some parent consult and also consulting with teachers to give them strategies to pass on to the parents. I just want to also give a shout out to all the parents out there. The struggle is real. I know. I mean, most of us are not teachers and have really been thrust into this role. While some even still working at home. So definitely navigating some uncharted waters here. I have two young kids and both my husband and I are working from home. So I get it. It's a juggling act for sure. So in this presentation, we're going to be talking about increasing motivation and promoting independence during distance learning. So this is definitely a struggle that we've observed across the board, both formally and informally. I've heard that motivation and independence has, been a big issue for a lot of our students during our one-on-one consults, and then many parents reached out to the teachers to pass this on to. And we also sent out a survey, and only about 5% of parents felt like their students were independently or mostly independently completing their work. And most people kind of fell in the middle. So the point of this presentation is not to ask you to change your relationship with your child or give you any insanely complicated strategies or give you a one-size-fits-all solution. I'm here to briefly break down motivation and independence and why there might be a lack of one or both, and to offer some strategies to help. So this was very much a collaborative effort. I've received a lot of feedback from teachers, and I will also be showing some examples that we use at JB Akron. This presentation is definitely going to be more heavy on the motivation side because a lot of that does lend itself to independence. All right, so we'll get started. So motivation is the general desire or willingness of someone to do something. It's also the reason or reasons that one has for acting or behaving in a particular way. So we are all motivated by something. There's really technically I don't want to say no such thing as a lack of motivation, but you can certainly be motivated to do nothing. And some students are just not motivated by grades or task completion. So well, to put in a little bit of extra work, that's a totally normal thing. So why is this lack of motivation happening? At the end of the day, I'm a behaviorist, so I'm constantly looking at variables. So some reasons why our students may not be motivated in the way that we would like them to be. So really you should stop and think, what's stopping my child? Is it a lack of empowerment, a lack of control? That one is big, especially right now. As parents, we think that it's difficult for us. Imagine what it's like for our students who, are going from a school that is very tailored to their needs and, have a structure and a routine to all of a sudden having a rug pulled out from under them almost. Well, it's got to be pretty tough. Anxiety over a variety of things. So poor understanding, maybe not having the basic foundational knowledge, or a task is too complex, or a deficit in social skills. So they may not have the ability to let us know all of this. And a lot of times this presents as escape. So these students resort to, well, I'm not going to do it. I can't do it. But they really can. So I'm going to go through some strategies to increase motivation, proactives, controlled choices, starting small, always using positive reinforcement, rewards or incentives, so what we like to call reinforcement systems, and flexibility. So some of the proactives, a big one is using a schedule and following a routine. So not asking you to match the schools, but have some form of consistency. Almost all of our learning is asynchronous, so you can be flexible. If your child prefers to follow the school schedule to a T, that's awesome. Some of our kiddos are a lot better completing all their work in the morning, some in the evening. And the nice thing is that you can also let your child have a say in the creation of this schedule. Visuals are key. All of our teachers at JBA and I'm sure at JBL as well have plenty of visuals around their classrooms. Schedules, expectations, we can use timers and also checklists. Some students like to see their schedule and check off what subject that they've just completed, or check off certain parts of a task. A couple more proactives. Building in breaks, such as brain breaks, which I'll kind of go into in a little bit. Relaxing physical activity. Yoga is the first thing that comes to mind. Some kids just need to burn off energy, go outside, run around in the yard, jump on the trampoline, swing on a swing if you have one, or a neutral break, because sometimes just even taking a break from work is a reward in and of itself. The one important thing to note about these neutral breaks is you definitely want to make sure that it's not something that's super highly preferred, because then you might have a tough time getting your child to transition back to work. Definitely ensure that you have clear rules and expectations. You can even make a visual for that if you want to. And also making study time easier. So a designated workspace, it doesn't have to be a separate room or even a desk, whatever works best for your child and keeps them on task. So you also want to choose an area that's not overstimulating or distracting, and definitely have your materials available and accessible. That cuts down on the number of excuses. How many times has your kid gotten up, to look for a pencil and use that as an excuse to not get back to work? So one of the things that we use at JBA are brain breaks. So here's an example of some of the cards that we use. Things like doing 10 jumping jacks, jump in place 10 times, wiggling your whole body for 10 seconds, squeezing your right hand with your left hand, only moving the upper half of your body, spin in a circle 3 times to the right, do 5 push-ups, do a cross crawl. So these are just some things to break up the monotony of schoolwork. Here is another example from our JBA first grade classroom, their rules and expectations. So 5-star listener talks about, eyes up front, ears are listening, mouth is quiet, hands are still, feet are on the floor or quiet. And then they do have a punch card about showing expected behaviors. So the common examples: be nice, listening ears, eyes to the teacher, quiet mouth, hands and feet to self, using a calming strategy. So sometimes requesting certain materials or a break, staying on task, completing work, following directions. So the next one is controlled choices, and they're choices that you give your child, but you still control that desired outcome. So basically, you are determining the outcome and your child decides how to get there when given 2 or 3 choices. So you are giving your child the power to make a choice. And buy-in is really important, especially with distance learning. So they are more likely to buy in if they're engaged. And also, who doesn't like choices? So offering those choices does prevent negotiation, because it boils down to 2 or 3 concrete things isn't open to interpretation. So the prevention of negotiation and the ability to make a decision cuts down on that. So Think about it. You much rather have a boss who's flexible and lets you have some say versus the one who barks orders all day, right? And so oftentimes kids who are feeling a lack of motivation or anxiety or anything are looking for a power struggle or the way to escape whatever it is they're supposed to be doing. So us as parents, we're human. Try not to feed into it because the second you've gotten into the power struggle, you've lost. And sometimes it's hard to get out of that cycle. So with sample choices for distance learning, this or that. Do you want to use your pencil or your cool marker to do your math? Do you want to type or write your assignment? How many? Do you want to do 2 sentences or 3 sentences before you break? How to help? Should we read the story or listen to the story? Who will help? Would you like mom or dad to help you? So this or that, how many, how to do it, who will help? Sometimes with our littles, we can include things like, what color? Do you want to wear your gray pants or your black pants today? Some keys to success here. Give a limited set of choices. You don't want to give like 5 different choices. They're going to have to really stop and think about it. You may even forget what you've said. So I recommend 2 to 3. I typically err on the side of 2. Make sure that they're reasonable and somewhat equivalent. So for example, if you want your child to clean his or her room, you don't want your choices to say, well, would you rather clean your room or play on the tablet? I'm pretty sure you know what your child would go for every single time. So always, always, always follow through. The less follow through you have, the less likely controlled choices will work in the future. And also make sure the choices you offer are ones you can follow through on if your child does not make a choice. Avoid giving choices that aren't available because if they pick one that's unavailable, then what? You're setting yourself up for some future problematic behaviors. Avoid empty threats. Can't cancel Christmas or any national holiday. Avoid being nitpicky. Really, what it boils down to is pick your battles. So another strategy for increasing motivation is starting small. So that can be within a schedule or within academics. And it reduces frustration and increases motivation. You can start small on a schedule, talk to your child, rearrange the schedule so that those easier academic subjects come first. And then they're starting small within academics, really capitalizing on what they know. And I have a couple examples of this coming up. So for example, you could present a series of directives or things that you know that your child can do before a difficult or non-preferred demand. So in behavior speak, that is known as behavioral momentum. So typically if a student is experiencing success, they're more likely to comply with a more difficult demand or non-preferred directive. And it definitely reduces frustration levels. Students are having success on easy tasks and increases the likelihood that they'll try harder behaviors. So here are some examples. They're all going to be child specific. You know your kid very well, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of. So for a younger child, for example, I'm just going to read this word for word. Beth is working on cleaning up her toys, which is a non-preferred task. You know that she's able to follow basic one-step and imitative directions successfully. You ask her to touch her nose, wiggle her hips, imitate jumping, and then ask her to clean up her toys. And she does it, woohoo, have a party, awesome cleaning, you know, and so on. An example for an older child, particularly with distance learning, same as working on double multiplication problems, so multiplying 2 double-digit numbers, and is struggling. He's already proficient in single-digit and double-digit multiplication problems. So you would ask him to solve 6 times 5, 9 times 1, 12 times 3, 5 times 14, then ask him to solve 11 times 16. So chances are, as he's experiencing success, he's going to keep rolling. All right. So next we're going to talk about reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is so important in all aspects of life. So the formal definition of reinforcement in general, It is the relationship between a specific behavior and its consequence, which is something that happens after behavior, that leads to a future increase in the probability of that behavior occurring again. So it refers to increasing the likelihood of a future behavior. So typically, when a behavior is followed by something that's valued, the behavior is more than likely to be repeated. And it is a consequence, which is something that happens after a behavior occurs. Oftentimes in the world of parenting, consequence is synonymous with punishment. However, it is not. The formal definition in the behavioral world of a consequence is literally anything that happens after a behavior. So that leads me into positive reinforcement. So that formal behavioral definition, when a behavior is followed immediately by the presentation of a stimulus, as a result, the future frequency of the behavior increases. So in other words, behavior happens, you add something desirable, that behavior is more likely to occur in the future. So some examples here, especially that we can use with our students: behavior-specific praise, high fives, tickles, access to a certain individual, or for us, a paycheck. You know, and positive reinforcement is so important. Going back to that paycheck example, if you went to work one day and all of a sudden they said, okay, well, you're no longer going to get a paycheck, you got to work for free. Are you going to want to come back to work? Probably not. So, which leads me into rewards and incentives, or reinforcement systems. And every class at JB has some form or some reinforcement system in some form or fashion. And a lot of kids have their own individual ones as well. So these can be used in a variety of ways. Usually in schools, the most common is a token economy, using a token board. In our case, it's pretty simple to set up, and it is definitely something that you as parents can do at home. And I know that a lot of JBA teachers have recommended this. So basically, you're setting up a system where your student can work to earn something: extra time on the iPad, special dessert, extra allowance. One thing you want to make sure is you always state your expectation first, so that your student knows what he or she needs to do to earn. So using first then or if then language. Think of grandma's rule. First you eat your vegetables, then you can have dessert. So some things to remember in terms of the reinforcers or rewards. So make sure that reward your child is working for is not something that he or she has access to all the time. So think about it: a toy that your child is able to play with several times a day would probably not be as reinforcing or valuable as a new toy or one that he or she hasn't seen in a few days. Reinforcement must be contingent upon a specific behavior, and be very clear about that. So be very consistent, and don't deliver for any other response. So you want to give the reward or the positive reinforcement immediately following the desired behavior. Because if you take too long to do that, that connection might be lost, or you could accidentally reinforce a problematic behavior that may have occurred within that time. And reinforcers should be delivered in a size that is worthwhile. The more that's delivered in at one time, the more of an effect it'll have on behavior. So that key is to find a good balance. So delivering just enough of the reinforcer for it to be effective, but not too much, because they're going to want to keep coming back for more. And so in terms of determining the size, you definitely want to give more reinforcement for the more complex or independent tasks versus the easier tasks and anything that's prompted. So at JB, we use token boards quite a bit. So this is kind of your basic token board. In that top square, the chosen reinforcers there, visuals, they're great. And on the bottom, the earned tokens are placed into these spaces. Tokens could be stars, pictures, I mean, really whatever your kid likes and is motivated by. So some keys to success there: making sure the reward is something your child finds motivating. deliver behavior-specific praise. That's so, so important. Things like, I love how you're sitting in your desk. Great job getting that math done. Hey, I really like how you asked me for help. And like I said, giving the token immediately after the desired behavior occurs and being very consistent. So here are some examples, because token boards can definitely, they can definitely range. You can get super creative with it. This one in blue I'm working for. Some of our classrooms at JBA use it, and on top it also has a set visual of expectations, which is pretty cool. One with a computer, that's a pretty standard generic one. And then this one is created for a kid who really likes Legos, which is pretty awesome. So another thing is, flexibility. So most of our distance learning is asynchronous, so take advantage. So schedules. Let your child take part in making that schedule. So, going back to that sense of empowerment and control. And the buy-in is much more likely. Be flexible with your workspace. Think about flexible seating. If your kid concentrates better while sitting on a pillow, that's cool. Go ahead. Teachers aren't going to care. And then basic modifications like writing versus typing. If it's a typing assignment and your child prefers to write, that's fine. They can write it and you can scan or take a photo and send it to the teacher. Consequences, not synonymous with punishment. It's really something that happens immediately following behavior. Behavior is any action in which we engage, and consequences can be positive or negative. So when you do have to employ a consequence, so just make sure it's meaningful. Consequences really help dictate whether or not a behavior will occur or not in the future. So that positive reinforcement we were talking about, that is a consequence. So really our lives are shaped by them. Speeding tickets, good grades, paycheck, weight loss, things like that. And so these consequences can be unintentional or planned. Unintentional, natural consequences, as I'm sure we are all familiar with. All right, so going into the back end, like I said, this presentation was more heavily motivated. Heavily motivation based. And so it really plays into motivation. So when a child is motivated, whether internally or externally, they are more likely to be independent. So in this case, especially with the distance learning, independence is not only doing something by yourself, but it also includes having choices and control, of course, within reason. So before I move on with this though, if you believe that there may be a foundational skill your child is lacking, definitely check in with their teachers. So, but on the flip side, some of our students have developed that learned helplessness, while some do struggle. So the longer that you're going to be their homeschool teacher, it'll definitely become more obvious with time. So if in doubt, go ahead and ask. So the strategies to promote independence, modifying an assignment, chunking, breaking down complex tasks, and we'll talk about those three. And then the next four, I already went over in the motivation section. So those controlled choices, starting small, always, always, always using positive reinforcement, and rewards and incentives. So modifications and chunking. So some examples of modifying an assignment. The parent does the first math problem, student does the next two, parent does one, student does the next two. Eventually that will open the door to some independence. The option to type or write. You could give your child the option to do half of the vocab words in the morning, half in the afternoon. Or, have your child just do all the even or all the odd math problems. Examples of chunking, basically breaking up the tasks. So 3 spelling words, then a break. 3 additional words, then a break. Or another example, 6 math problems, then reading. And then we'll go back and complete 6 more math problems. Breaking down tasks. Virtually any task can be broken down into smaller steps that can be taught or practiced one by one. Beneficial definitely for complex tasks. and also something that is very effective if your child is having a difficult day. And the example that I have here is hand washing. In my visual, it's broken down into 6 steps. You know, turning on the tap, wetting your hands, getting soap, rinsing your hands, turning off the tap, getting the towel. You can actually break it down into 20 plus steps. It was actually a challenge that one of my grad school professors gave us to see how many steps you could break down hand washing into. So our highest number was 24 steps. Hopefully you don't have to go there. And then just some take home points about independence. You know, be present and supportive, but try to resist the urge to just do it all. It's definitely okay to offer help, but don't take over. You may have to be heavy on the prompting, but then try and fade that back quickly. You know, we don't want to develop that learned helplessness. Don't be afraid to collaborate, especially with the teachers. BCBA, we also have one at Lyndhurst, other therapists, OT, speech, and other staff. And then adaptation is really important. So in this situation, you have to adapt. You know, we are in some crazy times. I mean, this is completely unprecedented, something we never thought we would ever see in our lifetime. And you know that traditional school schedule may not work, and that's okay. You guys are doing the best that you can. You know, it's not going to be perfect. Your child's not going to remember if you follow the school schedule to a T. All that matters is that we have great relationships and we get that work done. Your child is learning. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, want specifics, so you can feel free to email me at any time, mlaco, Laco, @jbschool.org.